바쁘신 일정에도 불구하고 오늘 국제회의 참석해주신 존경하는 예빈 여러분 그리고 청중 여러분께 깊은 감사의 말씀 드립니다. 그럼 개회사와 함께 회의를 시작하겠습니다. 개회사는 손열 동아시아 연구원 원장님께서 해주시겠습니다. 손열 원장님을 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Yeo Song, President of East Asia Institute, EAI. On behalf of EAI, I would like to welcome all of you to Seoul. I'm sure that all of you have arrived yesterday. And to Asia's Middle Power Democratic Coalition Forum. It is an honor and pleasure to welcome our distinguished guests and panelists from Japan, Australia, India, and of course South Korea. And also keynote speaker, Mr. Kang Jong-sik from he's the Deputy Minister for Multilateral and Global Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, RK. Since the launching of ADRN in 2013, EAI has served as a founding member and the only representative from South Korea, and also served as the ADRN Secretariat, working to make ADRN a united front for democracy activists and researchers to develop common intellectual ground and thinking space to promote the importance of free and independent democratic research, both home and abroad. Together, EAI helped to make another layer to the ADRN, bringing together a community of experts, civil society leaders, and policy influencers from consolidated democracies in Asia, including Australia, India, Indonesia, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, to foster dialogue and promote coalition building for a regional democratic agenda. As these countries occupy a strategic position within East Asia or Asia, we could call it democratic middle powers, have the potential to serve as the key role models for fledgling democracies in the region, working to address democratic challenges. Today's session is exactly that. It is the very first intellectual effort to identify applicable tools and strategies for democratic middle powers to foster and strengthen liberal democratic values, as well as contributing to build a coalition that will work together to bolster democratic values and norms within the region or in the world. This is a timely, obviously, and actually an urgent call at a time when liberal democracies and populist authoritarianism emerge and prosper, I should say, in the world, and especially within the major powers. And because of that, I mean, liberal and democratic values are at risk, so we really need to have this forum. This middle power democracy coalition idea has been developed, I believe, by Dr. Suk-jong Lee, who is my predecessor of EAI and worked earnestly to fund this program. I would like to thank her for distinguished service. And also, I am very grateful to National Endowment for Democracy and NED for the support it has provided since 2015. Thank you very much.
감사합니다. 이어서 강정식 외교부 다자외교 조정관님께서 기도 연설을 해주시겠습니다. 강정식 다자외교 조정관님을 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. Good morning. It's great to see you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to speak at this important gathering of the Asian Power Democratic Coalition Forum. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of the forum for the high respect to create this event. This forum, I believe, provides us important opportunity to share our experience and lessons learned on democracy in Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, the Asia-Pacific region has experienced a tidal wave of democratic movement over the past few decades. The spread of the democracy has been truly remarkable. According to the Freedom House, only 9 out of the 45 countries or territories in the Asia-Pacific region achieved free status in 1972. However, the number doubled to 18 by 2017. If we also include partly free status, the number increases to 31, which represents 69% of the region. This proves the claim that democracy in compatible with Asian country is no longer valid. Democracy may not be an Asian invention, but Asia certainly fully embraced democracy. The roads that the countries have chosen and the level of democratization that they have achieved vary from country to country. However, it is clear that growing democratic governance in Asia has brought greater peace and prosperity, not only to individual countries, but also to the region as a whole. In recent years, we have seen democracy retreat in many parts of the world. It seems democracy is not working properly and not delivering on what it promised. Inequality is growing within and between countries. The uneven benefits of the globalization are dividing societies and into winners and losers. The middle class, the backbone of the democracy, is under great pressure. This has set the scene for resurgence of populism, nationalism, and nativism. However, if we look at the democracy globally and over time, the picture is different. Democracy has proven to be much more resilient, and the spirit of the government of the people, by the people, for the people, is still alive and well. Of course, democracy is not a perfect system. It has its flaws. Democracy is not something to be achieved overnight. It takes time for people to become democratic. What is important is that while the democratic process may be long and complicated process, it is nonetheless provides more stable, more solid foundation for equitable development. Democracy frees and enables its citizens. In turn, the empowered citizens become capable of nurturing and fostering democracy. This ultimately creates a virtuous cycle of inclusiveness, stability, and development. Meanwhile, under the dictatorship and authoritarianism, people are landed alone, and their rights and freedoms infringed. They become marginalized and susceptible to burden and abuse. Such a condition leads to a vicious cycle of poverty, patriotism, and underdevelopment. We have seen time and time again dictatorship lead corruption because they are not held accountable, and they repress their people because their primary means of governance is violence and coercion. What is the case in point? We experience war, dictatorship, as well as authoritarian regime. But whenever those crises emerge, Koreans rose to the occasion. As late as 2 years ago, millions of Korean citizens took to the street and held candlelight vigils for months and protest against corruption, abuse of power, and injustice of the government. We went through an unprecedented constitutional crisis. Eventually, Korea's democracy, as its constitution was restored, and a new government was formed in a most peaceful way. This is what Korean people call candlelight revolution, which demonstrated the resilience and the vibrance of the Korean democracy in a vivid fashion. Great development is challenging. In most cases, it does not take a linear path, but instead uphill with ups and downs. Democracy depends on strong institutions, checks and balances among different branches of the government, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, free press, and independent judiciary. Democracy cannot be taken for granted. We should be always on guard and stay alert to possible dangers to the democracy. And if time comes, we have to act boldly. In the past of the Korean democratization, there has been always those who have stood up and fought for the democracy when they were called upon. They believed in the power of democracy and the capacity of the citizens to pressure the government to change policies and peacefully remove oppressive and corrupt and poorly performing government from the power. Ladies and gentlemen, embracing the desire of the people for a full-fledged democracy, the new Korean government attaches a great emphasis to democratic values and has implemented policies to realize those values on the ground. Furthermore, leveraging its own experience, Korea would like to contribute to enhancing democracy in the region as well as the international community. Korea has been supporting and funding the project of the Community of the Democracy to help build the democratic constitutional culture in Myanmar since 2014. This January, Korea hosted the Busan Democracy Forum for promoting peaceful, just, and inclusive societies in Asia and beyond. Furthermore, Korea is working with UN Democracy Fund to promote democracy and civilian activism worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, The Second World War brought an end to the colonial rule, and more people began to embrace a new vision of humanity based on the principles of democracy, rule of law, civil rights, and the inherent dignity of every single individual. The progressive forces are on the march. They are inexorable because they are built on the premise, fundamental premise, that all people are created equal, and each individual has inherent dignity and worth. Men are bound together by the common humanity. We are all human, and our differences are superficial. Thus, it's incumbent upon us to treat each other with a lot of care and respect. It's basic tenet for democracy will not change regardless of the time and place. Today, Asia is at a critical junction in its path to democratization. The active role of the middle powers is called upon to promote international cooperation and dialogue based on a strong sense of solidarity. As a country that has traveled an arduous path toward democratization, the Republic will remain as a great supporter of these efforts. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I am confident and this forum will make a positive contribution in promoting democratic values in the nation and build a democratic regional community where all respected peoples fully enjoy their freedom and no one is left behind. I wish the forum a great success, and I wish you all the best in your endeavors. Thank you.
감사합니다. 이것으로 개회 순서를 모두 마치겠습니다. 이어서 민주주의 증진과 아시아 민주주의 중견국가의 역할을 주제로 제1부 회의를 시작하겠습니다. 김훈현 동아시아 연구원 원장님께서 사회를 맡아주시겠습니다. At this point, I would like to invite all the panelists for the first session to come up to the floor and take their seats.
Thank you very much. So our public session today is Middle Power Network for Democratic Promotion. The title and the question, overarching question is how can Asian middle powers promote democracy internationally? Because, like I said before in the opening remarks, this is a very important issue and very important task, especially when we are now facing the general trends of democracy retreat in the world and also in the region. And so how establish consolidated democracies from 4 countries in this panel can contribute to reverse course and prosper democracies in the region. That's the topic. In that regard, we have invited distinguished panelists from 4 countries. From my right, far right, Professor Suk-jong Lee from Sungkyunkwan University, representing South Korea. She is the former president of EAI and has done a lot of great things for the ADRN. And next is Mr. Yukio Takasu. He is United Nations Under-Secretary General and Special Advisor, Japanese government's Special Advisor to UN Secretary General on Human Security. He is an expert on this particular matter. On my left, Narinjan, is it correct? Narinjan, I'm sorry. So, Sabu from India, who is a senior fellow of the ORF, Observer Research Foundation. EAI and ORF have a close relationship for building for many years, representing India. And far left, representative from Australia, John Kane, professor of Griffith University. So we have 4 distinguished panelists, and I think we believe we have about an hour and a half to go. So I will distribute 15 minutes each for your thoughts, and then we may ask some questions to the panelists from myself and then from the floor, and then we close. Okay, so let's get started. Professor Lee.
Good morning. My name is Suk-jong Lee of Sungkyunkwan University. Today we gathered here to discuss what Asia-Pacific middle powers can promote democracy and defend the democracy internationally. And I'd like to say 3 points. Number 1, there is a serious setback in the world. So there is the global democracy is suffering. And second point, because of this situation, I think Asia-Pacific middle powers, who tend to be very much democratic, had to do something to defend and to promote democracy internationally. And then last, I'd like to suggest some specific things on what the Asia-Pacific middle powers can do collectively and also individually. So let me say about first point, the worldwide decline of democracy. I think many of you here are interested in democracy and read about all this global data. Usually in the early this year, they publish global data. So let me quote only the Freedom in the World 2018 report. And the Freedom House writes, quote, democracy faced its most serious crisis in decades in 2017 as its basic tenets, including guarantees of free and fair elections, the rights of minorities, and freedom of the press, and the rule of law, they are all important, the basic tenets of democracy, right, came under attack around the world. And based on this democracy index survey, the Freedom House reports that 71 countries suffered net declines in political rights and civil liberties, with only 35 registering gains. This marked the 12th consecutive year of decline in global freedom since 2006. I think scholars and researchers following these democracy issues have noticed that the expansion of global democracy has almost stopped in some early 2000s. And ever since, there is a kind of a serious setback in democracy of the world. And in particular, recently, we have seen a very serious setback, especially in advanced democracies. And you have seen the rise of populism in European countries. primarily due to the refugee issues. And also in USA, with the Trumpism, there is a kind of a very, the America First policy, so neglecting Americans' international duty to protect and promote democracies. So actually, these democracy champions are suffering from their internal domestic politics and domestic democracy. So that's why this is a very serious consequence. So this lack of a commitment from conventional strong democracies to defend and promote international democracies in international community, actually embolden authoritarian states. So you have seen many authoritarian states with a strongman leadership became more assertive, hurting democracy in their own country and also hurting the democracy in the region. So this is quite serious, grave situations, for people like us who believe that protecting and promoting democracy is very, very important. Okay, then who should act? I think Asia Pacific is relatively still strong, and we believe that the Asians countries are likely to sustain its growth, economic growth, and also democratizations. So among the Asian Pacific regions, the speakers of today is South Korea and Japan and India and Australia. And our title is Middle Powers. Let me briefly say about what is middle power. Middle power is a relative concept in the power hierarchy. So middle power has taken the position between great power and weak power. So middle powers tend to have resources. Okay. However, if you believe in more behavioral characteristics of middle powers tend to value democratic norms and rules, and they are very good at multilateral diplomacy. So therefore, Japan and Canada, for example, they belong to G7. So maybe you may say they are not middle powers, they are economically strong powers, but nevertheless, middle powers can value and they can contribute to the quote-unquote public goods of international community. So if I just concerned about this behavioral pattern, they don't play unilaterally, they are more cooperative, so they can take many good roles, they can mediate, they can bridge, and they can be very known entrepreneurs, emphasizing and promoting democratic values. There are many things that middle powers can play. Okay, then naturally, because of this grave situation in the world, the decline of democracy, I think Asia Pacific middle powers should play more to protect and promote democracy. Then, how can we do? Actually, South Korea has been active in creating middle power coalition, global coalition called MICTA, Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, Australia. And this MICTA version, I think it's been still continued, but the emphasis is more on human security rather than democracy protection and promotions. So I think Asia Pacific middle powers can, expand their roles contributing to public goods of international society to democracy-related agenda. So let's say, for example, Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 16, is concerned about good governance and democracy. So for SDG 16, the Asia Pacific middle powers can work together, right? For example, the SDG 16 member groups are working on providing more free access to information, so helping the government to open up the information. And also they are concerned about justice, so protecting human rights of underprivileged groups. So all these goals of SDG 16 are very well matched to the democratic ideas and values, and our group, the Asia Pacific Leader Powers, can work together under this banner of SDG 16. And of course, there are many agendas we can do together. And also, when we work together, we can find more individual niches. How South Korea can play better, how Japan can play better, how India and Australia can do better. And if I am thinking about South Korea has been widely praised as a very dynamic democracy. But frankly speaking, as South Koreans and our democracy activists and practitioners and researchers were more insular-oriented. We are usually concerned about our domestic democracy rather than promoting and protecting democracy internationally. But for me, it's time for South Korea to take a more positive and proactive step to help the countries who are suffering from democratic setback and also who are too weak to sustain their democracy. And how we can do it? There are several ways South Koreans can do better. For example, the South Korean government, we are spending like $2.3 billion per year for ODA, Official Development Assistance. That is about 0.16% of our gross national income. And I believe South Korean government is trying to increase the amount of development assistance. Compared to Western donors, so to speak, the South Korean donor was cautious about promoting democracy directly because they were afraid of intervening in domestic politics of developing countries. But nevertheless, the ODA implementation agency, KOICA, was emphasizing the good governance. So good governance is a kind of neutral way they can strengthen civil society and also transparency of e-government and that kind of things. But in addition to these activities, I like to encourage our government to allocate ODA budget to a country that are opening up. So they are too weak, but we have to help them not to go back to undemocratic situation of the past. Because Korean ODA is giving small to too many countries. So we have a fragmentation issues of ODA allocations. So if we concentrate and help more to these weak democracies, I think that can be a good option and a good direction. And also, there are many things the Korean private actors can do play. For example, universities. We are inviting many universities of South Korea running a program with mid-career officers and government officials of developing countries. Using this program in academia, I think we can train and we can teach about many things that can be useful to strengthen democracy in their country. So we can do individually, we can do collectively to advance and to protect and promote the democracy in the region and in the world. So let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. I think we would just straightly go to our next speaker.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank East Asia Institute for inviting me to attend this very important meeting. This morning, I'm going to talk about this issue in my personal capacity, not as representing the United Nations. In the capacity that I'm chairing a new study group in Japan by a civil society organization called Japan Center for International Exchange. It was created in 1970, one of the oldest, in fact, pioneer civil society organization for dialogue and intellectual exchanges, very active. And this year, this organization created a new strategy about democratic governance, and particularly how Japan can do more to promote democratic governance in Asia and Pacific. So, in that capacity, I'd like to address not every question that organizer asked me, perhaps 3 questions because of time. But before answering specific questions that organizers raised, I'd like to say a couple of things. First of all, I think Asia Pacific is the most dynamic region in the world. And I think we should probably remember 2018, this historical time period, where the middle of a very fundamental, this transformative age in international relationship. And things are moving very fast. And among this, Asia Pacific is the center of this attention. And what is going to happen? Status of democracy, international order-based international relationship in this region will affect the global situation. So I think the matter that we're discussing here is a very, very important strategic meaning. And of course, it affects peace and security and prosperity of Japan, which is located in the region. So in that context, the second thing is I think we have to realize, I have just taken liberty of this 2018 Developed Democracy Index and also 2017 Democratic Index, I don't know, it's somewhere there. Our region is, I think, characterized as very vast, this diversity in the status of democracy. From true democracy like Australia, New Zealand, to almost full democracy, but not full, like Japan and India. But going to other extreme, the authoritarian, the political system as well. So that from this almost perfect to this very imperfect. So you see here, and also, of course, we should remember that this type of democracy and also historical for the context have to be taken into account. In other words, we have to take the Asian value, and it does mean that when democracy was introduced to mid-19th century to this part of the world, and the Japanese translated this word to this Japanese and is used by Korean and Chinese, the same expression. It doesn't mean that there's no hardcore democratic tradition in this part of the world. It was not hardcore jungle. It was a very well established political order, very benevolent, compassionate order. So I think we really have to realize that when we talk about liberal democratic order, or decline, or recession, threat, whatever, I think we have to remember always. But doesn't mean necessarily other extreme, that therefore every country is free to do anything to the people. I think fundamental human right is universal. Application takes some time, some nuance. But I think this is very important, because there's no change or difference in the value of the individual human being Japanese, or being French, or being American, or being, forever. The same universal value. This is not something that we cannot compromise. So when we talk about what are the challenges then, I think we have to have a different discussion yesterday, threat to populism, for instance. But the wider political participation, if you call populism, is a positive thing. So why are you worried about it? It should be encouraged. What we should talk about is negative impact. So what are these? I think there we can agree. For instance, what are these? I think this is some element here, like threat to functioning democracy. What are these? First of my list, top of the list, is freedom of expression. If that is suppressed, I think we should speak out clearly. Whatever the political regime is, freedom of expression is suppressed. That's good. You remember that Amartya Sen, who is a very good friend of mine, because we are promoting human security all the time together. I've been doing human security for 20 years. You remember that one of the books he wrote about famine in Bengal and other countries. Famine, people dying by starvation, many people. It's not because of lack of food. Food are there, but people are dying. Why? Because of lack of entitlement. Why lack of entitlement? Because some people want to make profit maximizing, so they hold in their own storage and don't sell it until people start dying and other things, the price get high to maximize profit. So why it happens? Because lack of freedom of expression. Media couldn't criticize things, doesn't write about it. So they could get rid of this one. So freedom of expression is a very key concept. Whatever regime political system is this, I like common for foundation. And also suppression of minorities. And control of civil society. And of course, weak political accountability always all this. So whenever this happens, wherever the country is, I think if we believe in this democratic value, I think we should speak out and say that we don't accept it. So this is, I think, a basic, as a common, platform I should work out. But I think I can answer this first question because already a professor mentioned about the role of middle power, so that I will say that question. First question I'd like to ask the answer is, what can we expect from middle power democracies when defending democratic values, internally and externally? Internally is extremely important, internally within your country, within my country. Insist on political accountability. Democracy stands three pillars. This so-called regularly held election. Many countries have organizing election. Not always countries, but some countries organize, but anyway, most of the countries. But it's only first pillar. Second pillar is political accountability. A well-functioning democracy has political accountability. And also basic civil liberty. And this most importantly, political accountability. You insist your own country, you speak out in different starting point, because everybody comes from different parts, and some of it is I don't know. So respect of freedom of expression is very, very important in this. And also economic policy. Where are the causes of populism? In my opinion, fundamentally, most important thing is liberal democracies failing to deliver the benefit to all people. It used to be like that. Liberal democracy was not politically attractive, culturally attractive, but also economically attractive, because it's delivered benefits to all, not only very few selected. But it's not performing anymore. And the alternative government is performing better economically. They're benefiting better. So what is competition there? Who is going to win? Of course, those systems which benefit all. Not necessarily all, but anyway, more. So in other words, there is a hardcore, I would say, competition. But performance differences there. I think in order to promote democracy, I think development strategy must be geared to benefit to all. Inclusive development is one word. Majority, minority, extreme few, and the elite and other things is getting most of the benefit. And the lowest people are getting something, but the middle people, lower middle people are getting less. If this situation continues, of course, they will be amplified more and more. So therefore, the inclusive development policy within a country is extremely important. And also like-minded country, I think representing most of the country, and strong coherence, and no compromise to the universal value, no yourself. Before promoting this outside, first look on your own feet. First look at your own country, including my own. And also I like to emphasize the regionalism. I'm not saying that Asia is different from Europe or the United States. But I think from my own experience, perspective is different. I'm not defending some of the policies like, I don't know, friends from Myanmar here. I'm not defending the behavior of some countries. But for instance, I served myself, my career, many Asian countries, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and other countries. I worked myself. and they witnessed change of government, dictatorship, and other things. But from this experience, I talked to, like a constitution in Myanmar is criticized by many countries because they give guarantee of certain seat of parliament to military forces. Military sound really terrible thing to Western democracy. It's only controlling. But some, I'm not, but in context like Indonesia, for instance, military is Indonesia now, was created from village people to support people locally and all together with me. It's living together with people. From there it started. So when this change from military regime to democratic government, transition, you need something for stability. You cannot jump into from one to another immediately. So therefore, categorically, no military representative parliament is undemocratic, therefore therefore rejected. It's too simplistic. Of course, there must be transition gradually, like Indonesia, reduced. So these are kind of things. Pro-regional, I'm not saying, we are not talking about same different standard, but way of achieving this, you cannot jump immediately from it, because there is a historical culture and background. Without complying principle, you have to. That's the point I like to say. Second question is, what are the strategies and action plan in store? In Japan, in my opinion, the most backward part of Japanese democracy is women's participation. I'm not saying that the women don't vote. They vote, but they don't become candidate in the parliament, central government, local government. Real commune parliament, so they have 30% share. But when you go to prefecture, about 10%. National parliament, we call it that. This upper house is 20%, but lower house, which is really powerful, is only 10%. So that many of us have been working to create quota women, because whatever the gender equality, it's very difficult. But strong resistance for quota system in Japan. So finally this year, we have succeeded getting new law of so-called gender equality candidate law. But it's not compulsory, it's not quota. In other words, every political party is invited or encouraged to gender parity in candidate. In the next year's election, I know opposition parties are very positive. I'm not saying that the candidate, no guarantee that they can see, you have to be elected. There are many reasons for this one. I think gender is one in Japan, within Japan. But for external policy, I think as I said, the Japan Center for International Exchange, JCIA, launched this new project to support democratic governance in Asia, to mobilize political leaders in Japan for prioritizing this democratic governance in this policy. There are four pillars for this activities. One is to mobilize the political awareness among policymakers and the political leaders. And the third one is dialogue and networking with regional entities. And I'm very much happy to have this opportunity, because I have known many people get to know this time. It's very, very useful for my next 3 years project. And the third one is how to strengthen capacity of civil society and media and journalists. And this is a 3 years project supported by NED and other donors inside Japan. And I'm very much excited about it, this project. And in this context, probably this team will get in touch with some of the organizations to promote further collaboration. The last question was how to middle power democracy generate strategies for addressing democratic deficit in other countries. As I say, not only your own, but encourage every country for promoting inclusive development, not for economic policy to favoring few. This is one, I think, fundamental thing. Another area, I think, important part is open and inclusive approach. This is easy to say, but difficult to practice. Open, fine. Open means your open arm. Wherever you are, please welcome. But inclusive is another thing. And probably my own project, probably I will take approach to invite those colleagues who are living not in this even, this other spectrum country. Because important thing dialogue. And not speedy changes. You cannot expect one country, which is traditional many thousand years and different way of living, to change to the system like that has been developed in completely different civilization. But there are ways to improve political accountability and inclusive development. So therefore, I like what I suggest is that we should seek a common platform to work with not only like-minded countries, but those countries which are not included like-minded countries. Because it's pity that those believers are speaking together and work together. That's fine. But how about other things? And we have to answer the pitch. That is all, in many ways, doing things. So one of these so-called common platform. This professor mentioned about SDG 16. He took the word from my own mouth because I have been promoting that from you. But I think it's important. In other words, SDG, Agenda 2030, has been agreed by all the political leaders, 193 countries, including those political leaders of authoritarian government. They didn't object this. This is different from earlier so-called MDG. MDG was basically to reduce poverty and to promote education, things like this. This is very good. And MDG's Millennium Development Goals, 2015, plus human security equal sustainable development goals. Meaning that development must be sustainable, meaning not just environment is taken up, society is taken up, sustainable. Debt must be sustainable. Economic development is sustainable. Environmentally sustainable, that's good. But not only that, individual living on the globe, in the earth, and in society, and the economy must live in a human way, meaning life, livelihood, and dignity. I'm preaching that life and livelihood, every animal, not only human being, are entitled to. What distinguishes human being from other animals is dignity. Every individual is entitled to dignity. So sustainability and dignity are two key words. That's connecting every individual. That's very, very important, sustainable development and access to justice for all, and then with not only strong, effective government, that's important part of this, what you call democracy. Strong government to one part. Election is one thing. Political accountability and the third one, isn't it? And then SDG 16 says, effective, okay, but also accountable, inclusive institutions at all levels. This is what Chinese leaders, Russian leaders, every leader agree. And we can insist. And please, thank you very much giving 5 more minutes. Originally I thought that only on 10 minutes, but 15 minutes, so it's very just I conclude. And so therefore, I think from that point of view, the human security was mentioned already. Human security is very simple. Believe in the individual value, wherever you come from, whichever country, it is differences to ethnic group, whatever. Every individual, once you're born from your parents on the earth, you're entitled to live in such a way that you fulfill your potentials and dignity. So this is something that everyone can work with. Going forward for Japan, I have a very good, this is conclusion probably from my project team, so I'm perhaps preempting myself. But Japan should place strong support for democratic governance at the center of foreign policy. It is already included in the National Security Strategy 2013. And Japan's ODA policy has a pillar for democratization 2015. But there are many things we're doing, but it's not enough. So therefore, this is first point one. Second, review ODA priorities to diversify channel of communication. You know, ODA means government to government. That's ODA. Therefore, that Japan's ODA is very different from some of the Western donors. That we will not say you should do this thing. Wait for the request. On the basis of request, government will select. This is a very basic principle, because to avoid interference. But at the same time, the government we have for channel communication is limiting to support civil society and greater involvement. This is the area, I think, in the younger people's youth organization. This is point two. And support, as I said, basic value means what are the basic values? Freedom of expression in the press. And then judiciary. Yesterday we have heard from Pakistan that independent judiciary is omnipotent and abusing this. This is another extreme perhaps. But I think lack of judiciary independence is problematic for many countries. And then lastly, we should promote dialogue and understanding and an inclusive approach. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Niranjan Sahu from India.
Thank you, Chair. I think my two distinguished panelists have covered much of the ground, so I would not like to repeat what they have said. But invariably, this theme would actually, there will be overlapping, because we'll be mostly talking almost similar thing in a different set of version. I'll largely focus about India's contribution on this emerging theme. But before that, I would like to give a sort of very quick kind of what's happening and why this particular demand about middle powers, what Professor Lee has coined, I would say, is very significant, because for last 5-6 years, in fact, some of us have been struggling in different forums like Carnegie and Brookings using this terminology. Initially, in fact, I had actually a lot of reservation with some of these Carnegie scholars using non-democratic, non-Western democracies, what they can do. I said, why non-Western? Why do you create a sort of casteism, sort of Western versus non-Western? And that itself, creates a problem, barrier. I think this middle power appeals well, and it would actually fit ideally countries like India, Brazil, South Korea, South Africa, many countries would easily fit. So thanks for actually taking up this initiative. The context in which we are speaking is very important, because today last night some of us also mentioned, this is a sort of extraordinary time in terms of those who are actually thinking about democracy and democracy promotion. Probably 20 years back, we wouldn't have been debating about this, because America was going full burn with its intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan, regime change and establishing democracy, other things. So everybody was thinking that with kind of ideology and Francis Fukuyama, they coined many fancy end of history, this thing, all that have actually gone wrong. In fact, today we are actually standing at a very critical juncture where we are actually seeing the rise of authoritarian models, which have actually greater appeal than the liberal democracies that used to be 20 years back. In fact, 20 years back, China was debating vigorously how China would actually subsequently move to become a democracy. Today, I think they don't talk about that. In fact, China is in many ways, in a subtle, I would say, aggressive way, is promoting its own model of governance and democracy. That some of those political scientists like Daniel Bell, in fact, are actually unabashedly promoting by saying that Chinese model is more efficient, more productive, and it offers a sort of alternative to the Western capitalistic, liberal democratic order. So we are in a critical juncture where we are actually seeing more and more countries are backing Chinese model that we have seen in Philippines president or Cambodian president, even Viktor Orban. Eastern Europe, you have a lot of democracies who are actually openly backing Chinese model. So this is one very important thing. And those who thought actually China, officially doesn't intervene, and unlike United States or even former Soviet Union distillers regimes to establish your own type, it is beginning. If you look at its influence operation, and even in countries like Australia, which have actually faced the Chinese sort of in recent years, and United States, it has raised so much of concern that the Congress has actually set up a committee, and you have reports coming in which says that the cultural as well as political influence of China spread over American university and campuses is massive, and Confucian Center, some of those issues have actually been bothering them. When we talk about that in Asia, it's a altogether different ballgame, because China is here. We have to face Chinese ambition and its rise. I have no sort of prejudice or any kind of ill feeling for China. It's a big power, big economic power. I think it needs its own space. That's need to be accepted. But I'm saying, in terms of political system, in terms of governance models, China is different than most of the countries in Asia. So there lies actually the problem, and what you have witnessed in the case of South China Sea, or even Chinese interference in ASEAN, and then the way that the Hong Kong umbrella democracy movement went, and in Taiwan case. So you are actually, you should not have any, you should not be naive, to see what's actually going to happen in the next couple of decades. So that is where actually Asian powers have to really, especially the Asian democracy, have to play a far more, I would say, visible role. And countries like India, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, you name, Thailand, which is going through a democratic struggle, but I think it will come up. All of have to take more responsibility, and with Indo-Pacific churning that we are seeing with US backing and Australia coming, there is a great amount of curiosity. What's actually this region would probably provide a kind of more sort of, I would say, viable alternative and opposition to Chinese sort of unrestrained rise in a manner that threatens the liberal democratic order. Second thing is about democracy's own problem, that which Professor Lee mentioned. Freedom House and International Idea have been reporting for the last several years the decline, and countries after countries, you can see the freedom is actually taking a toll. And for 12 consecutive years, you have actually global freedom has declined in a significant manner. And today with Donald Trump, you don't actually need any talk about these things. You are witnessing what's happening to the freedom and democracy. So I'm saying, see, you have a context in which there is a compelling case for Asian powers, the middle powers in Asia have to take more mantle and provide a better sort of story for democracies, I would say renewal, because democracy is going through a recession, so it needs to be renewed. People's faith need to be brought back. What Ambassador said, that each country, its own domestic story should actually be first the priority, before we jump into just create a block and start talking about how democratic model is much better than other autocracies. So this is one thing which Asian power have a greater role. Coming back to India, India is the largest democracy, as we know. It's a 1.3 billion kind of democracy. Probably 5-6 decades back, nobody thought that Indian democracy will even probably survive 20 years. As soon as the country got independence, in fact, some of the American political scientists wrote that balkanization of India, and India will just become another 500 countries, because when country got independence, we had more than 600 princely states coming together to form a kind of union. So that was the kind of diversity if you're looking, and it's not a country, it's a continent in terms of diversity, linguistic group, religious group, and kind of the population. So that country continues to surprise many theoreticians about its democratic success. So India actually is one country which, with now its economic rise and military rise, and also its own aspiration to become a global power, I think we are seeing in India a rising kind of debate on what India should do to promote liberal values, because this is something India has benefited for last 70 years. So now it's time for India to contribute something to promote and strengthen the same values that has actually given it so much in terms of its governance model and stability. So in that context, although we have been for last 4-5 years been debating why India is a hesitant power, despite its size, its kind of capabilities, why it still remains a hesitant power. There are many sort of factors for that. One is of course our very long kind of history of non-intervention, respecting sovereignty, that non-alignment movement. India was the leader. So for almost past 5-6 decades, this became our kind of standard benchmark of our foreign policy. That we'll be doing everything, but we'll not go to another country without the invitation and do anything, any kind of change. I think that applies to most of Asian countries as well. So this is one thing which constrained India to intervene in many crises. Of course, India has intervened in many crises like in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in different ways. But I'm saying very directly, very rarely India has done, except for probably Sri Lanka. That is actually beginning to change now, especially in last 7-8 years. Not only with Narendra Modi's government in last 4.5 years, but even before that, when the Congress government was powered with Dr. Manmohan Singh as the Prime Minister, India in fact went on changing its track on many of these issues. In fact, on number of occasions, India took a stand against very friendly countries like Iran. Even in Commonwealth, it went against Sri Lanka, its own very close neighbor, on certain issues like human rights and other things. So I'm saying there is a beginning is happening. And today, especially with the development that we were witnessing in our own neighborhood, like rise of China and then the emerging that axis of democracies through Indo-Pacific, with Japan, India coming very close, India, Australia, America is also pushing that they should come together, the axis of democracy, 4 major democracies, and put up resistance to preserve the sort of what you see the crisis in Asia. One, especially the rule-based order, what we witnessed in South China Sea and in many other area. So that is under threat. So that needs to be preserved, and if that has to be preserved, then emerging and rising powers in Asia have to take a very, very strong stand. So that's one which I think holds a lot of promise. But second thing, I thought what's also is happening is India is also investing a lot in regionalism, as Ambassador said. For instance, our policies in last 8 to 10 years about Arc East and about India's West Asia policies also now unraveling in a very positive way. So India is getting much closer, not only economically with ASEAN and East Asia. It's also in many ways there are mutual cooperation happening in many ways. Last 3-4 years, in fact, I'm privy to some of the meetings in Foreign Ministry about India's contribution to consolidating the governance process in Myanmar and Afghanistan. It's been massive. India is almost net provider of $2 billion US to Afghanistan. It constructed the entire parliament building and it's been providing for judicial reforms, for policy reforms in many ways. Same thing is happening in Myanmar, and of course with Nepal we have a much longer kind of cooperation on technical support and governance support. So I'm saying in terms of providing technical support and support in terms of democratic governance, India has been making massive contribution which it doesn't want to say to everyone. In fact, last year India's development aid to Africa was second to China. So you can see $17 billion India provided to most of the African countries. So I'm saying India is a net provider of aid, foreign aid, than recipient. 10 years back it used to be the net recipient. So I'm saying there is a dramatic change in countries' ambition and approach. So that's where I think we need more cooperation from countries like Japan, Australia, Korea, where India needs more prodding, because India in fact entered into this entire democratic arena with the prodding of America, especially in Clinton era. India became the supporter of the Community of Democracies. UN Democracy Fund, India is the second largest contributor after America. So I'm saying many things it has done actually when the Western countries acknowledge India's contribution and they thought that you can actually do more than that Cold War kind of thing where India was caught on the wrong side of the story. So that's actually gives a positive narrative. And 5-6 areas which I have identified where actually I think all of you have already highlighted, but I think this is where actually we think we need more focus in Asia. One, country-to-country level cooperation, which is like now happening, like India, Japan, and India, Korea. In many ways, it's actually beginning to take steps. But I thought it needs more aggressive sort of approach. And initiating this kind of forum also, it gives a good feeling that there is something people are already feeling. So I think country-to-country level, and within country-to-country level, I thought also party-to-party level cooperation also can be very useful. What you can actually easily see, like Republicans party cooperate with a lot of similar party of ideology with Europeans. That doesn't happen in the case of Asia. So in Asia, for instance, we have a lot of political parties which have similar ideology that we see in India or in other countries like Indonesia. You don't actually see that sort of traction. India, in fact, India has for last 7-8 years, there is an interesting development which has happened. There is a cooperation between Republican and Bharatiya Janata Party in India. Now they have formed a lot of actually, kind of MOU. They have signed a lot of MOU and they are cooperating on many things, exchange visits and a number of issues that are taking joint stand. So that's something to also explore. And then regionalism also about regional organizations like ASEAN, SAARC and other forums that exist within Asia also can do more on this than just becoming symbolic, time to time declaration that freedom of navigation or rule-based order, promoting democracy, all that they just announce in an annual event, but it ends there. So there is no actually concrete that what you see like European Union and others have been doing for years. So this is where also there has to be sort of. So in fact, within this, you can also have a club of countries also coming together and doing something and encouraging others to also join in. Like what we are now witnessing about the quadrilateral forum for democracy, the naval power. What we are seeing is that maritime cooperation between these four powers in Indo-Pacific. This is the Japanese Prime Minister in 2007 made a very seminal that this is where actually they can do more in terms of creating access of democracies. It has taken a traction, but I think issue is more that is being discussed is about maritime cooperation, the security kind of creating a security diamond, and more largely intended towards China. So I thought the focus also there need to be also to include more on cooperating on democracy, on democratic governance, creating regional models which can actually cut across different sort of spectrum, and that would actually give a more positive vibe, because you can't simply just create another NATO type kind of security bloc and say that you are doing best to maintain or put up a resistance to China's rise. That won't actually appeal really unless people see certain values enshrined with that sort of grouping. And another, the final thing I thought is also there has to be larger cooperation on many multilateral issues of global importance, like on climate change, on internet governance, on outer space. There are a lot of issues actually, including security, privacy, and many other issues, where a lot of countries can actually suffer because of hacking, because of mass scale disruption of the internet, and internet is being controlled by a couple of countries with their technological powers. So this is where also when we talk about future internet governance, I think largely it's liberal democracies in Asia which have to come together and take a stand, because it's also issue of preserving their own autonomy. So I thought some of these issues would actually probably require more vigorous discussion and dialogue within Asia, and this forum actually does a great service in kickstarting some of these issues.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you to the Organisation Institute for inviting me here. It's very pleasant to be here in Seoul for the first time and to meet some interesting people and hear their views. Coming in the tail end of 4 people, I have even worse problem than the range of because much of what I was going to say has already been said. Democratic values have been well expounded, which we all concur with and agree with. So I thought I'd try and put a perspective. What struck me when I was first invited to this was, in the range and I were talking about this in supper last night, 10, 15 years ago, if you talk about democracy promotion, you were talking about a done deal in a way. It was inexorable, as the speaker this morning said, hopefully, that democratization is an inexorable force in the world. And of course what's happened in the last 15 years, and it didn't help, of course, that democracy promotion lost its status, as you said, when George W. Bush went into Iraq under the cover of democracy promotion. Didn't do it any justice. So democracy finds itself, and I've been thinking about this when I got the invitation, it finds itself on the back heel now, not on the front foot. It's less about democracy promotion and more about democratic defense. How we defend the democracies we already have, and it's come up in several talks here today. Let me just start with one observation I had, and Professor John Lee adverted to it before. There was middle powers diplomacy. Middle powers do other things than promote democracies. In fact, some middle powers are not democracies, but they can be drawn into various alliances which try to. There is an institute called the Middle Power Institute, which is it's an NGO, which has been going since about 1998. And its whole purpose is to bring middle powers, whether they're democratic or not, and some aren't, into a denuclearization program to rid the world, or at least control nuclear spread of nuclear weapons in the world. Now that's only very tangential to do with democracy, but it's a very important thing in which middle powers can and do play a part, and they do cooperate together to do things which are not about democracy promotion, and their answers just given as a whole litany of problems that the world faces that we can't solve individually on our own. None of us can. No nation, however powerful, can solve the problem of climate change. It has to be an international initiative, and we know how difficult that is. And yet this is the challenge, of course, before us. But on the question of democracy as such, it remains an important question. But as I was thinking about it, it's come up several times in the talks that we've given already, this democracy being on the back foot. The world has changed, and I agree very much with Naranjan. And what we have actually is a competition going on at the moment. We have rivalry now. Democracy, certainly once the Berlin Wall had fell and the Soviet Union fell apart, seemed to have no more rivals, real, serious rivals left. You're going to be a democracy sooner or later, and your whole, not just individual freedom, but your economic development and so forth, dependent on you becoming a democracy as soon as possible. Curiously enough, and I'll pick up something Yukio said before about economic development being crucial in all this too, and the stages by which different nations approach democracy can't be simple. You can see this in the attempt to democratize Eastern Europe and Russia, the Russian states, after the Russian Empire fell apart. American economists were over there quick smart, telling them how to organize their economy. Fundamental thing, organize your economy, your civil institutions will follow, democracy will be peace on earth, goodwill to all human beings. It didn't work like that, because you can't just go into a completely different environment with a completely different history and say, this works for us, it'll work for you too. It didn't and it doesn't, and that was Yukio's point, I think, and I think it's a very, very important one. Curiously enough, the world we live in has been reshaped since at least the 1980s by the forces of what we call globalization, and this ultimately had an economic foundation. And it just didn't happen by accident, by the way. It was policies of developed countries, and particularly the United States of America, that said, The deal we had after the Second World War of kind of managed, controlled capitalism will no longer hold. We will unleash capitalism, it will run free, and by the way, we'll all be better off at the end of the day. It's a bit more complicated than that. One of the countries that actually ran with the freedoms that were given and the opportunities that this presented was, curiously enough, China. China took the opportunities that globalizing power, the outsourcing of production, etc., of these now free multinational, transnational firms, which became more powerful than they'd ever been before after this globalizing process began, and a great deal of the governance that used to be internal to democracy was handed out to transnational corporations. And we were doing deals with India and China. I get phone calls from India all the time. People doing work that used to be done by Australians. This is globalization, and created a whole new mosaic of patterns, which some countries did well out of, and others not so well. And some people in developed countries did well out of, and other people not so well, and created the discontents that we can see in what we were talking about last night together, the populist movements which have kind of roiled democratic countries around the world. And this is a problem with democracy promotion. Now we do have a rival, and it's called illiberalism, illiberal development. And this is what Xi Jinping advocates. He doesn't want democracy. He thinks democracy is bad because Democrats just argue with each other all the time and don't get anything done. If you want to get something done, you get someone who's decisive in power and can deliver what they promise. I absolutely agree with you here that the problem with democracies now is they are seen to have failed to deliver on their fundamental promises. A lot of which is equity. We've got massive disparities of income and wealth in democratic countries now, which were there before, not in Japan, by the way, but in other developed countries. And we have some people who seem to be left out. What went wrong? Well, China has its version, and a lot of other countries, as Naranjan is pointing out, are saying, yes, the illiberal model is the way to go, not the democratic model. So we have all of a sudden, from democracy being the next great thing for the whole world, suddenly we have a kind of a contest going on. And who's going to come out on top of this contest is not clear yet. It's far from clear, nothing is ever clear about the future. But everything is up in play. As Yukio says, this is a dynamic, Asia is the dynamic region in which a lot of this is being played out. It's kind of dangerous game though, in that who was the champion of democracy promotion from its inception? The United States of America. It was kind of born in its infancy, lead the world towards freedom. This is how it saw itself, how it conceived itself in its mythology. After the Second World War, it was the only great nation left standing, most power left standing. Leave aside the challenge of the Soviet Union, which became the Cold War, but its ambition after the Second World War and its opportunity, unique opportunity, was to establish a new world order which would lead precisely towards prosperity for all, increasing development in third world countries, and if people were developing, naturally democracy would follow. They would have voice, they would demand accountability, democracy would follow. Now, of course, history, there were some successes in the Great American experiment, but there were some great and telling failures as well. And now we have the curious situation, if you're a democracy promoter, that the greatest promoter of democracy in the world, I remember a story about when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she was in Beijing, and people were talking about, oh, don't go on about human rights again. And she said, come on, guys, we're Americans, that's what we do. They said, back off, you Chinese should understand that. This is what we do. Stop complaining about it all the time. And if we don't do that, we're not Americans, actually. Now we have an America run by Donald Trump, who doesn't care, who's taken it off the agenda. Democracy doesn't want anything to do with that. If he has a beef with China, and of course he has at the moment, it's nothing to do with the values that were so eloquently expressed here before about democracy. He doesn't care. It's a business deal. And by the way, you're screwing us, and we're going to screw you back. Who's going to be a winner in this zero-sum competition? This is what Donald Trump's America is about, all these insofar as Donald Trump has any control over it. And so when the greatest defender of democracy in the world falls away, however temporarily, let's say it is temporarily, what do all the powers that have become democratic, and as Yukio was saying, arduously, through a very, very fraught process, especially in Southeast Asia, coming to democracy? I was thinking, as he said, that actually about my own country, Australia, in that, and our democratization. We never struggled. We just kind of had it from the beginning. We didn't struggle against the colonial power, as the Americans did. They kind of just gave us our independence. And it's a curious thing, isn't it, from coming from a background where you had struggled for a democracy, as in South Korea here, does its value and retaining that thing have a different aspect? I think it must do. From us in Australia, we just kind of take it for granted. We have our discontents and so forth. We don't have enough women in Parliament either. And that's an issue for one of our parties at the moment in Australia. Democracy always has a way to go. But it puts a lot more pressure. With American retreat, a lot more pressure suddenly is on middle powers, those democratic middle powers, to preserve what they have. And America has, in its quest to promote democracies, historically had kind of always saw it as two choices. You have two choices. One is, and they're both kind of Christian choices. One is you're a missionary, you go abroad, spread the good word. If they're fighting in Greece for independence and freedom, we go and help them. The other was, no, you don't do that. You stay at home, you safeguard your own democracy, you make it as good as possible, and it becomes a shining example that the world will want to follow. One way. Now, it seems a simple binary choice. It never is that simple, of course. The problem with the missionary zeal and getting entangled is Iraq or wherever. You get entangled in things which are much easier to get into and get out of, and sometimes the results aren't what you wanted. Democracy, in a way, does begin at home. I think Yukio was saying this too, in a way, improving democracy in Japan. You take away, you can't begin where you want to get to. You've got to begin where you are. And you have to improve, and as best you can, democracy at home. Because it is important, it is important that you are a well-functioning democracy. Other people can look at it and point to it and say, see, they're doing it and it's good and it works. It works. So it really is important that you set the example in your own democracy. That said, there's naturally, there's a whole raft of theory out there about democratic peace. Democracies don't go to war with each other. It'll be disproved the first time. Two democracies do go to war with each other. But so far, you have to say that there's some element of, we feel this in our thing, that there's an element of fellow feeling among democracies, which doesn't exist amongst democracies and non-democracies. I think about India, for instance. We've been worried in Australia for many years about the rise of China. China is now our biggest, as for many of you here, our biggest economic partner. But who is our biggest alliance partner? We've only got one, the United States of America. So we divided between the rising force and the declining force. And we all are, in a way, stuck in this thing. Why don't we worry about India? This is you're a rising power too, with 1.3 or 4 billion people, as much as China. Why don't we worry about India? My answer is always, we don't worry about them. They're a democracy, like us. So there is some genuine fellow feeling amongst democracies and some potential for collaboration and cooperation. Thank you. In the future, and this is happening. Now sometimes the cooperation is going on between India, Australia and Japan at the moment is frankly military. We're having lots of exercises, military exercises. And what's that all about? Well, China knows what that's all about. Containing China. And China has its responses, its Belt Road Initiative and so forth. It's a dangerous competition, actually, if something goes wrong. Conflict is not inevitable, never is, but the kindling is there for potentially dangerous things, which we will get dragged into willy-nilly, we, democracies or not, in Southeast Asia. There's going to be an alignment if conflict comes. Which side are you on? The old political question Carl Schmitt put years ago. Who's my friend, who's my enemy, ultimately? And we don't want to get there actually. We do want to cooperate, we do want democracies, we do want the promotion of democracy. It is a dangerous world we live in, and how do we do that? I have no answers. There's the question. And I'm glad this forum was raised, I think.
Thank you. I just realized that this session is on live streaming, so people are watching us and listening to us. So I mean, if I said before presentation, I don't know what would make a difference. We have about 15 minutes. I'm very sorry. So I actually plan to ask questions to individual presenters, but I should not, because we are really running out of time. Let me just mention 3 points. One is that there are challenges for presenters have made, which comes from so-called populism. I think yesterday we had an extensive discussion on that, and if the challenge to democracy in Asia in part comes from populism, then populism comes from socio-economic conditions that we all know that there's a dark side of globalization that creates income disparity within and between the countries, and grievances and polarization in politics that creates sort of stalemate and decay of party systems, democratic party systems, and we see populist leaders. So one way of handling, maybe indirectly in the long term, is to look at the socio-economic situations and how to improve those income disparities, and that causes lots of political debates. So that's something that we need to think over. And second is very interestingly but sensitive is a China problem. It is not problematic because China grows, continue to grow, but it has its own model, and then that model spread to Asia, even eastern part of Europe. So that illiberal model gains some currency in the world. So how we deal with this China, and I think our Indian representative talked about it, but we didn't really hear how to deal with this enormous political challenges. That's another thing. And then finally, I think some of the presenters touched upon sort of the spillover or negative spillover, or the relationship, I should say, the relationship between democratic promotion, international middle power cooperation over democratic promotion and diplomatic relationships. If we have a sort of positive cycle of democratic promotion among the countries, that will create positive spillover to other areas, where be that economic, even security, and then security, economic cooperation, in turn strengthen democratic cooperation and democracy itself. But we also see the vice versa, that interstate competition, whatever rivalries, diplomatic frictions constrain democratic promotion among the middle powers. So I think we can easily pick up the case of Japan and Korea. There are issues of history issues we can call it, but that's also human rights issues that is related to democratic values. And then this issue plays out in a negative way, in Japanese-Korean relations or Chinese-Japanese relations, etc. So we also see this sort of negative nexus of issues, negative issue linkages, then how we sort of separate those negative links and eventually turn to a positive cycle. So those are my own takeaways from four presenters. I think we will get a few more comments and questions from the floor, and then I'll give you a few minutes to. Okay, the gentleman over there first, and you, the gentleman, yes, and then, and this gentleman, gentlemen. Yeah, you go first. Could you identify yourself and make questions?
Okay.
Yeah.
Quick, my name is Mohammed Taseen and I'm from Pakistan. My first comment is that I'm intrigued by the title of the session 1, Promoting Democracy Internationally. I hope you will agree with me that we need to look inside also, how much democracy do we promote within our own countries, and then among our own regions, such as South Asia with the neighbors. I think we need to review that. Because within our own countries, there are serious deficits of democracy. We have 2 atomic powers in South Asia. We have millions of people in these 2 countries, Pakistan and India, where they do not have adequate facilities for toilet facilities even, what to talk of inequalities. We have terrorist organizations, 22 ulfas in Northeast and in Balochistan and Pakistan. So there are serious questions. And I can go on and on in other countries. So that's one. My second question or a comment is, the premise somehow, I'm a bit uncomfortable with the premise that China is a problem and we have allies with America. America, who raided, Vietnam War, we have forgotten. I think there is a problem in this premise also, and that also require that all of us, look into it. Yes, we must have democracy, but democracy, essential part of democracy is to provide peace. And I hope my friend from Australia and India, all the speakers would help me understand how to go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Once again, could you make questions and designate who you are giving questions to?
Good morning, I'm Francisco Magna, I'm from the Philippines. The emerging populist leaders, especially from our context, are very critical of the superpowers, so I think it makes sense that middle powers come into the picture. So my question can probably be addressed by everybody, but it's really, is there a strategy for meeting or engaging with these populist politicians or leaders, meeting them in the middle? And what do you mean by a middle level strategy? And our experience with our former colonial masters, education has been a very big program, education exchange. So is this something that the middle powers are interested in engaging in? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this gentleman. And then one last one. I'm sorry, we are completely running out of time. The gentleman back for.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm a student of Professor Lee's University, I'm studying Global Masters in Public Administration. It's surprising to know that as academicians or people who are being trained as public officials will be key promoters of democracy. In our curriculum, our academic curriculum, I believe that democracy is hinged on equity and freedom. We don't have models that talks about equity. Equity is mentioned shallowly. But I think that to shape the minds of future leaders in public administration, the issue of equity should be given a priority. It should be a key issue in our curriculum. It should be mounted as not a subsidiary, but something that must be studied. And when we go through these things, it will help us in the issues of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Eric Yu from Taiwan and from Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. I think Taiwan Foundation for Democracy could be up to now, could be the only foundation that similar to AED to promote democracy. And I wondered, because I'm working there, and I wonder how to build trust among some middle power, given that there are so many other historical barricades and some other kind of different historical memories. How to build a trust among the middle powers to come to promote democracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Kaustup Bandyopadhyay and I work with an organization called Participatory Research in Asia, based in New Delhi. I have two questions. By the way, thank you for all these four wonderful presentations, and I was thinking about what do you think about the role of civil society in the promotion of democracy? And all four presentations to me was a kind of statist view of democracy promotion, where state to state, country to country, that's the kind of work that you have spoken about. And what role the government can play in strengthening civil society to promote democracy, both domestically and internationally, number one. Number two, in the last 2 decades, there have been an emergence of exclusive clubs like IPSA or you mentioned about MITCA, and we're sort of proudly talking about Quad and everything. I'm all in, but to me the question is that does it in a way undermine the role of global multilateralism and through UN system? So are we really sort of strengthening the UN system in promoting democracy, or are we weakening through these exclusive clubs? There's two questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have many questions, but time is up. Now we are into overtime. I will have to ask each of the presenters in a very undemocratic way to just pick up one point out of many questions and address it in 2 minutes.
Okay.
I'm very sorry.
Because I talked only 10 minutes, maybe I will have 3 minutes to address 3 questions. First of all, from the cost of the questions, I think creating MICA or Quad, any intergovernmental unilateral venue, is not hurting any UN global multilateralism or even larger, like ASEAN or APT and whatever, because the unilateral venue, those units are actually trying to facilitate the bigger unit of multilateral organizations. And you mentioned, of course, we have to strengthen civil society rather than the government to government corporations. Of course, that two track will go together. And there's a big question of China. It's a very delicate question. If you ask to South Koreans, why didn't you participate in Quad? The Quad is USA, India, Japan, and Australia government-to-government cooperation starting from last year. And they have a second meeting at the margins of EAS meeting this year. I don't think the South Korean government was invited, and even they invited, South Korean government would say very quietly no. Because South Korea's position towards China, we have a very strong engaging strategy towards China because of all these important economic ties and also South Korea's very important role in the peninsular affairs and their close ties with North Korea and so forth. So South Korea, while we are very strong military ally to the USA, we are valuing the very close relationship with China. So for that matter, there is not much South Korea can do if this kind of intergovernmental venue is viewed as a kind of containing China. I know that the spirit of Quad is not directly to contain China, but they rather to promote the idea of open and free, the rules-based order in Indo-Pacific area. I think it's fine, but rather for South Korea, we rather prefer more informal, like this one. So the private actors and the civil society organizations and academia research organizations can defend democracy and also can promote a rules-based order, because a rule-based order is very important for the goals and practices of middle powers who value all these multilateral corporations. And if I ask to the last question, I'm glad to find graduate students from developing countries attending our school. And when Sungkyunkwan University has this school of training global mid-career officers, our edge specialty was e-government, because e-government is reducing corruption of public officials. It's not just you electronize government information and government services. It's good promoting participation from the ordinary citizens, and also it's good to reduce the corruption of officials because all this bureaucratic procedure became transparent. And of course, you can learn more inclusive economic development if you go to KDI school, for example. So there are many schools in South Korea who try to train and show our achievement, at the same time our weakness from our past experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Try to answer as much as possible in 2 minutes. First of all, relationship with unilateralism and multilateralism and regionalism. Very simple answer first time. First and second. You see, UN is created globalism, but consists of regionalism too. That's from the beginning. In other words, we have 193 countries, but every region has their own distinctive culture, background, and things. So therefore, it's not really opposite concept. Asia Pacific is different from other regions in the entire world. There is no universal regional organization, if you think about it, historically and other things. So this is one thing I just want to say. There is no contradiction, because it's not exclusive mutual. The second question is about, first of all, look at your own feet. I completely agree with you. I said in my presentation, before preaching others, just to look on their performance. Every country has room to improve. Japan has room to improve. Other countries too. And I think what the country like Japan and others can do would be to promote all the countries who are not performing well in terms of development, inclusive development. This is something that we can do. Third one is how to engage all other countries, including countries like China and Russia. I think I mentioned about dialogue and inclusiveness. And we need basic, you have this common platform to basis. If you preach what you are doing at home and tell Chinese and Russian and all things, why don't you do this? This doesn't work. See? But there doesn't mean that we cannot talk to each other. They just compete and then win the race, and then probably we are going to lose. I think, in economics. So you need a platform. That is something that we can develop. I have indicated a couple of things that are something. And the interesting thing is that Japan and China, I think, are two major, influences in this discussion. There's so much to talk about it, including as free and open Indo-China and Pacific. This is not more than a security thing. It's much broader things. And I don't think I can elaborate on this one. But it's not only free and open Indo-China, Indo-Pacific, but also inclusiveness. And how to bring China on board. That is, I think, a major thing to do. And between Japan and China, there are a lot of things going on. And we are trying both countries to improve bilateral relationship. There's a marked improvement at this moment. We had a summit this year, a few months ago. And Japan and China agreed to cooperate closely for the understanding and pursuit of fundamental universal values. It is very interesting. You see, Japan and China has a common basis, at least, starting point, not common basis, starting point at least, to promote dialogue and cooperation. I hope it will be helpful to improve this situation in this area. Equity, equality, and other things, something that's very close to my heart. I didn't use the word equity because dignity is much broader, inclusive things, inequality. And therefore, these, basically inclusive development is to achieve equity among the people, depending on what it is. In order to achieve this, in fact, SDG has a target, 17 targets, see, and 231 indicators. We have analyzed this one. This is universally agreed by United Nations. But for some country like Japan or Australia, it's not enough in terms of equity and dignity. So therefore, I have already one team. For 1 year, we have been working to develop the Human Security Index to promote dignity of everybody, including, well, Japan, including the United States, including European countries. Because challenge there is not necessarily identical with some other countries. So therefore, that next month, we're going to announce a Human Security Index of Japan first. And I hope it's going to develop so-called SDG indicators for developed countries. So this is an area that will pursue dignity and equity, equitable development. I hope this is going to be very excellent. Last thing is the role of civil society, what government can do. I just give you an example, for instance. Last 20 years, government has passed a bill to promote civil society organization. In a matter of 20 years, 55,000 new organizations were created in Japan, many, in different areas, social issues and other things. What we are doing is basically tax exemption to encourage. That is the basic government thing. But more than that, we encourage people, individual people, to donate money, not directly to NGO, but to this local government. And then that will be supporting NGO in the area. There are many ways that the government can do to promote without interfering in the activity.
Yeah, I think these are very important questions. I think all the questions probably require an hour kind of thing. So, but in one or 2 minutes, I'll just touch upon a couple of them, which is very important. Starting with what my Indian colleague Kaustubh said about civil society cooperation and then the dialogue among them is very vital. This is, in fact, I actually, what the draft paper I submitted, I had mentioned in the last day, I actually forgot to mention in my presentation, because this is where I wanted to emphasize the creation of that critical mass which is missing in Asia, that among the civil society, among the NGOs, among the think tanks, you hardly see any kind of dialogue happening on, not forget about democracy promotion, my Pakistan colleague said, forget about that word democracy promotion, talking about your own democratic experience. The innovation, Asian countries have made phenomenal kind of, I would say, very enriching contribution in terms of creating their own models. If you look at India, its own social democracy model, that equity issue which you raised. India is one of the probably a lab for kind of inclusion. If you look at the oppressed classes for centuries were pushed to the margins, sidelined, based on the caste hierarchy. Today, in India, through a silent political revolution through democracy only, because of only democracy, that affirmative action, political affirmative action, which allowed the oppressed classes, including some of those politicians like Mayawati, they have become almost similar like Barack Obama. They came from such kind of historical disadvantage as based on the caste and gender. They are able to utilize this platform, called democracy, and become chief minister, head of the some of the largest states in India. So I'm saying this is something you haven't probably witnessed in many countries in Europe. So I'm saying this is something also to share with among Asian democracies. That's missing among think tanks. We have, I would say, I can say very little cooperation. Once in a while, some annual events or some kind of talk other thing. But you have hundreds of think tanks in Asia. Do they really talk about these issues? So that also need to happen. It can happen to the encouragement and support of the individual countries, but it can also happen among those think tanks. And it's happening now, at least with the initiative of Middle Power Forum. So it's a great thing. And then the last thing I wanted to tell about is about this issues of rise of China, which my Pakistan colleague said about, and then America. Why we always get into this sort of rivalry, political slugfest, and with so much of consequences. That I agree. But then geopolitics and great power rivalry is a reality that one cannot disavow. But today, the issue is not about just great power rivalry, which is in any case will exist, but it's about the rising of a non-democratic and a sort of authoritarian model, which poses a challenges not only about military security challenges, it's about challenges about the values that almost in 200 years what liberal democracies, the democratic order has actually able to establish and provide a kind of what you said about peace is actually today under threat, because the democratic peace theory with some aberration still holds truth, because you just look at India. India's rise is also phenomenal in the last 2 decades, but why many countries are not worried about India's rise, whereas they worry about it's a non-democracy, it has a different model, and that is where actually most of the, I would say, anxiousness or anxiety is all about.
I'll be quick. The Pakistani gentleman, yes, you restated in a way what both you and I were trying to say. Democracy begins at home. Improve your own first. And there's always improvement to be made. The civil society one is interesting. It's chicken and egg in a way. You might remember Robert Putnam's famous paper studying Italy, north and the south of Italy. Why was the north of Italy democratic, the south of Italy resolutely undemocratic? And he put it down to civil societies. There was a freer openness in the north, historically, and lots and lots of civil societies from the ground up, grassroots up, provided the loam, if you like, in which democracy could grow. In the kind of authoritarian hierarchical structure in the south, civil institutions did not naturally grow, and the loam, if you like, or the soil for democracy didn't exist. So which is interesting to hear Yukio saying you can actually, in Japan, you can incentivize and actually produce the strengthening of civil society. Equity, that's what's always about. Equity is not the same as equality, by the way. It's traditionally regarded as fairness. Our outcomes fair, our institutions fair, our systems fair in what they do. And a great deal of the things we're seeing in the world now is that people don't think the systems have been fair to everyone. And we need to change it. And I come back to my thing about globalization. We've had a model of globalization that has been in process now for a good 30, 40 years, and in the end is run aground. We have to have a new model. We don't throw out globalization, because we're all here because we're a globalized society. We have a new model of globalization, and there are people thinking very, very seriously about what that might be, and how it would precisely be geared towards equity, and what one of my colleagues in America calls prosperity for all.
Thank you. We are significantly over time. Just conclude. Thank you for thoughtful presentations and discussions, and also intriguing questions and comments from the floor, let me conclude. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.